Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today I have Adam Baker, co-founder and CEO of Dealpad.io, a software giving sales teams a process to align with their buying teams and win more of the deals they work on. Adam, thank you so much for joining the show. I'm so excited, not only as a seasoned founder as yourself, kind of the experience that you've chiseled away and what you've learned from that and to uncover and share that with our audience, but also this particular interesting ecosystem around sales has changed a lot, especially as companies' sales teams and budgets are constricting. And it's interesting how companies like yourself are making more efficient, creative, and actually higher converting ways for sales teams to actually win and engage. So curious to hear about how you're able to do that at Dealpad, excuse me. But before we get into all that good stuff, what were you doing before you started the company?
Yeah, hi, Julian. Good to be here. So I'm a serial entrepreneur. This is my third software company that I've founded. And my background is pretty much in sales, in software sales. And I started out at Intuit. I've been a VP of sales at Salesforce. I've been the chief sales officer of 370 million for our SaaS companies. And sandwiched in between that experience, I've founded 3 software businesses.
It's so fascinating thinking about the evolution of what you've seen software become, being like the hyperscale, hyper growth, sell at all costs, SaaS models versus now. And describe the transition and how are companies kind of realigning their sales goals, and how has it changed since you've been in, and what's particularly different about now?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, in lots of ways, right? I think software has become a lot more advanced. I mean,
Yeah.
it's now software as a service, whereas
Right.
I guess if you go back 20 years, it wasn't as a service.
Yeah.
So certainly software wasn't as ubiquitous as it is today.
Yeah.
If you think about every department of every company, they use software of some
Yeah.
description. That
Yeah.
definitely can't be said 20 years ago. And what that's done is that's done a couple of things. I think obviously it's created more demand, but it's created more
Mhm.
competition. So it's tougher to sell software these days than it ever has been.
Yeah.
I also think that buyers of software are a lot more sophisticated than they've ever been. And they've got more choice, which has forced them into kind of building out very specific, intentional evaluation frameworks.
Yeah.
If I'm buying software for, I don't know, 100K plus, maybe even less than that, 50K plus,
Yeah.
I'm not just going to talk to one vendor. As a buyer, I'm going to talk to 3 or 4, maybe 5 vendors to kind of figure out who's got the best
Yeah.
solution to solve my problem. Does it integrate into the kind of workflows that I need it to? If I'm going to do that as a buyer, I really need to make sure that I'm almost a professional buyer now. I'm not an ad hoc buyer. And so that for a salesperson adds a lot of complexity to the process.
Mhm.
And now it's multi-threaded. It's very, very rare that you'll sell software today to a single buyer. There's usually a buying committee, a team of influencers, people that will come in very sporadically, only maybe once, but you've got to find them and you've got to engage them. They've got to become an advocate. And if they're not, or if they
Yeah.
prefer the competition for whatever reason, that influence could sway an ultimate decision. So I think
Yeah.
that software generally has become a lot more sophisticated on both sides.
Yeah. One thing that also comes to mind too, in terms of the evolution of it, is this relationship between the technology and what it means for business outcomes, and how that's really changed in terms of the impact I think software has on companies, corporations, even obviously people. One thing, I worked at an independent pharmacy, and we changed POS system so many times through, but there was less kind of, and as we kept changing, there was more impact on the business as something became better or more sophisticated. How's that relationship between companies and software changed in terms of their reliance on how much that impacts their actual business decisions? Have you seen a change at that, or is it the same relationship?
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I think everything comes from I guess learning, right? So we've seen how software has made teams, people, organizations a lot more
Yeah.
efficient. They can move a lot faster. They can do a lot more with less. And once you start to see that, and that took some time because initially software was classed as a kind of a CapEx investment. And it was
Yeah.
like, well, we're really going to spend this much on software. And now it's like, we have to spend this much on software because, we're going to get left behind. We can't move as quickly as our competitors, or we can't do what we need to do in the short space of time. Look, I mean, particularly for software companies, the pressures on them are pretty unique, right?
Mm,
You've got to show the kind of the J curve, the hockey stick. If you're VC or PE backed, you've got a 2x, 3x revenue.
yeah.
You've got some fairly high demands that you've got to meet. You've got to move quickly and you need other software to better do it. And so, excuse me. And so I think that just from the sake that the fact that people have seen how software has been able to help innovate, being able to help organizations move so much faster, become much more efficient.
Yeah.
Everybody now has software. And it
Yeah.
seems ridiculous saying that because obviously it's obvious that that's what software does now. But if you went
Yeah.
back 20 years, it definitely wasn't.
Yeah. And where do you sit in terms of how sales has changed? Are you in the camp that maybe the players and the variables maybe have changed, but the mechanics of sales are the same? Or is it a whole different landscape? Are we selling it a different way, using different strategies, tactics? Where are you? What camp are you in? Are you saying, it's the same kind of same ship, but different crew, or is it a completely different ship?
It's an interesting question. And if I'm honest, I'm going to give you a pretty vague initial answer in that because I'm on the fence with it because I think it is
Yeah.
the same. There's a lot of things that we've all done for many, many, many years that we continue to do. What has definitely happened though is, and look, sales is continually maturing and iterating. And as a salesperson, you have to iterate as well. And I think that even since COVID, when everybody was locked down, pre-COVID, these big enterprise deals would get done through relationships. You'd take a customer out for a nice dinner or whatever, right? Or you'd go into an office and you'd sit in front of a committee of people. Nowadays, it's starting to happen again. So it's likely that could happen now. But it's also very likely that most of the interactions you have are going to be remote.
Yeah.
And that really changes the game as to how you sell, right? So that's the first thing. I think secondly, I think that the kind of the plethora of tools that you've now got at your disposal, software that you've got at your disposal to be able to do anything at scale. So I can prospect at scale, I can outreach at scale, I can write, I can now have my sales copy written by GPT. There's a ton of things that I can do now. It means that as a salesperson, I need to be able to keep pace with technology and software and the capabilities that are going to enable me to be a better salesperson, more successful salesperson. And I think the third element is just how you interact and engage with your buyers. So as I said earlier, buyers are a lot more sophisticated than they ever have been. And so you now need to think really carefully about how you personalize your outreach. Because buyers now get emails, dozens of emails a day from SDRs and people reaching out to them. How are you going to stand out from that noise? Go back 5 years. As an SDR, you didn't need to really think as intentionally about how you're going to go and get a share of voice from that buyer because they didn't have these dozens and dozens of touch points that all these sellers are trying to kind of reach them on. And it makes it much more difficult for salespeople to become effective. If you think about if you think about discovery, right? It's a term that really has only been coined in the last 5 years in sales, but actually salespeople have been going on discoveries since the day sales was originated, right? But because the discovery piece is now so big, there's a process to it. There's a science, right? It's about finding the pain. It's about how do you help the buyer uncover it? How do you discover that? How do you align your solution to solve that pain? And it's not about selling anymore. Selling is not about sales. It's about educating the buyer. It's about taking the buyer on a journey. It's about showing that buyer what the world could look like, not necessarily just with your solution, but what the world could look like, and educating them and bringing them in that way, and then aligning your software to part of that world. And that wasn't the case necessarily 10 years ago. We've become much more value centric, which I think is great. It's if we weren't selling against value 10 years ago, then I'm really really thrilled that we are now, because
Yeah.
it's a much nicer, much better way of selling. You can align on lots of different things with your buyers easier. You can also increase the value of the opportunity as a salesperson. If you're not
Mm.
being stuck on features and you're not being stuck on
Yeah.
price, and you can really focus on outcomes,
Yeah.
then, you can start to increase the value you get. So
Yeah.
I think it's the world of sales has morphed into something completely different in the last 10 years, but it's a great change.
Yeah.
And I think that I think if you asked 100 salespeople if they've had to level up, even in the last 3 years,
Yeah.
they I would be really surprised if any of them had said they hadn't. And if they do say they haven't, then I'm not sure they'll be in a job for long. I wouldn't hire them,
Yeah.
that's for sure. We've been forced to
Yeah.
sell as sellers, forced to level up constantly these
Yeah.
days, and I think that that's really, really good. And think about the buyer experience. In doing so, because sellers want to become better salespeople, they want to be more successful, they want to close more deals, they want to
Yeah.
book more revenue, right? In doing that, they've actually helped the buyer,
Mm.
right? The buying experience now is front and center of most sales approaches. And the way that buyers buy is far nicer, far less friction than it used to
Mhm.
be for them, for sure.
Yeah.
And so it's actually an ecosystem that I think is working really well now. And companies that don't align with their buyers and really make their kind of have a buyer first process, they're going to struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple questions obviously come to mind is one, obviously, I'll start with one question. If you're a founder right now and you're looking to build out a sales team, you got your MVP up, what do I need as a founder to not only just justify, but to enable a strong sales team to even be effective? Because I think a lot of founders fall into the mistake of hiring a sales team without understanding whether or not it's their customer kind of pain points as much, the reasons why they buy, the timing of it, kind of the whole ideal process, going through it themselves, and then just trying to kind of patchwork that into their sales team. What would you say would be a more effective thing? What should I focus on as a founder before I bring on a sales team to actually enable them to have success? Is it a whole marketing engine? Is it the right tool, the conversations, a script? What in particular would you advise founders on to really actually enable the sales team, being that they actually need more materials, assets, brand kind of recognition to actually be successful? What would you say is important, most important when you're first building that sales team?
Yeah. One thing above everything else is the founder should be the salesperson. The founder should be the one prospecting. The founder should be the one closing the
Yeah.
deal. You can't. The danger is you'll build a business full of founder led sales. But I think that if you look at most companies at that stage, 90% of the deals are founder led. But how can you hire anybody to sell your product if you haven't sold it yourself? How can you coach them?
Mm.
How can how can you tell them, well, look, if you do this, this is a great hook. This is a wow moment. So talk about it.
Yeah.
This is the process. If you bring people in without a process, without a framework, without an understanding of actually what works, it's going to be a really expensive mistake to make, because
Yeah.
those salespeople won't be successful most of the time. I mean, there'll be some outliers, but most of the time won't be successful. And it will take you 6 months to really realize it. And by that time, you've sunk a lot of your cash in these salespeople that haven't worked
Yeah.
out. Now you've got to go back to the drawing board and rehire. You're going to make the same mistake again, because actually now you think it's the salesperson and not Drew and the business product, right? So
Yeah.
the only thing I would say, forget marketing, forget collateral. Doesn't matter if you've got any of that. The one thing that founders should do
Yeah.
is to sell themselves. Focus on it.
Yeah.
Don't outsource it to anybody else until they are absolutely sure that when a new person comes in, they know exactly how to coach them and exactly what to say to them. They've got, if not hundreds, then tens of sales meeting recordings
Yeah.
that so that the incoming salespeople can listen to. This is what good looks like,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And there's a process and there's a framework. If you don't have that, then keep doing it yourself. And
Yeah.
and as a founder, particularly in that early stage, you'll learn so much. It's
Yeah.
because often it's not necessarily about the product. It's about the value proposition,
Yeah.
right? It's about how you position this. It's about your ability to really focus on a painkiller, not a vitamin. You want to focus on a painkiller. And often it takes a whole bunch of attempts to be able just to pitch the same product in the right way. I haven't
Yeah.
changed my product, but I'm now able to sell more because going through this customer discovery of sales calls, these live sales calls, where I'm asking people to pay for my software, I'm discovering that what I was saying to them was a vitamin. It was
Yeah.
a nice to have. And it's taking me 50 different sales calls to realize that actually this is the painkiller.
Yeah.
I'm seeing it every single time I mention this now. So when I hire somebody, I've got a formula that I can talk about. That for me is the number one thing. It doesn't matter how much marketing material you've got, doesn't matter how many one pages you have, doesn't matter how many salespeople you have. If the founder hasn't gone through that process themselves,
Yeah.
in my experience, from what I've seen myself, but also from lots of other companies, 9 out of 10 will fail.
Yeah. Yeah. Shifting gears here, thinking about the process a little bit more, talk about DealPad. What in particular inspired the idea? You had run companies before, you're working at large corporations like Salesforce and Intuit. What in particular made you catch that startup bug again? And what, about the sales process do you find that DealPad is addressing that is not being addressed by other products?
Yeah. So DealPad is the tool that I wanted for my sales team. If you think that, let's just look at the sales stack, right? Every sales team will have a CRM, whether it's Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever it is, right? They'll have a CRM. Now, today, we're talking about software earlier and scale and automation. Most teams will have SalesLoft or Outreach or some similar tool to kind of build out email sequences. Most teams will have other tools like, I don't know, Lusher or Apollo to get data so they can now build out their base of contacts to go and prospect to. And then more sophisticated companies will have tools like Gong so they can start to coach and, have a bit more of a kind of intelligence across the sales layer.
Yeah.
That's great. And all these tools are really important, but there's nothing before DealPad that will actually help you close a deal.
Yeah.
When I'm sending my sellers into market, right, and I'm asking them to deeply align with their buyers, what have they got to be able to use to be able to do that? Right? They've got a CRM to document stuff. They've got Gong to record things and have that layer of sales intelligence. They've got Outreach to prospect to them. But actually, the most important part of any sales process at the end of the day is the revenue.
Yeah.
Like, we're not in this because we like, well, we probably are in this because we like talking to people, but ultimately we're in this to book revenue. And before DealPad, there wasn't a tool that would help you actually win deals. And so I left and set DealPad up, and it's proven with all the companies that we're working with now that I was right. There's a gap and companies need this tool. And so back to your second part of your question is what DealPad solves. DealPad solves the alignment with people in the buying committee. So if you think about why most deals don't close, right? Or most deals slip from pipeline, it's linked to people, right?
Yeah.
I don't have access to buying authority, right? There are people in the buying committee that I don't know about. There are decisions being made that I'm not privy to, right? I'm following a buyer's process, so I don't know when this is going to close. My best guess is X, right? Lots of different things, but all linked to people. That's what DealPad solves. DealPad makes it super easy to centralize everything into one place for the sales team and the buying team, and to go through the process together. And one of two things will always happen, not any exception. Either you'll get really deep engagement from your buying team and you'll be able to understand buying intent really early, and you'll then be able to go through that process in full alignment with them and say, this is going to close on the 30th of May because we've got we've collaboratively checked off all the tasks that need to happen. We've brought all the people in, and we've locked dates in for everything and nothing's slipped yet. So I
Yeah.
think I'm really confident this is going to happen, right? So we're going to close this deal. The second thing that could happen is that the buying team don't engage.
Yeah.
And so they prove there's no buying intent. Now, if I hadn't understood that really early, my team would have wasted hours talking to people in those businesses, and those deals wouldn't have closed. Now, collectively, if I've got a sales team of 10 and each one of those salespeople are wasting 100 hours a year in deals that they're not going to win, and they didn't realize it because they're still in meetings with people where there's just no real pain, no urgency, no access to authority, or no real engagement from the buyer, no real intent. That's 1,000 hours across the year that my team could have deployed in deals that we had a better chance of winning.
Yeah.
And what would that have done for our revenue? Right? If we could have really spotted early that these buyers just weren't engaged enough for us to go through this process with them, we could have 2 or 3x the amount of revenue we booked that each year because we were actually focused on deals we knew we had good engagement in and we could win.
Yeah.
And so that's what DealPad does.
Yeah. And one thing you mentioned is particularly piqued my curiosity was you mentioned if I'm in the selling the process, the sales process, and I have a buyer who has strong intent and there's some missing players that we need to align with, some stakeholders or decision makers that will be a part of it. How are you able to collaborate or get them to collaborate in this ecosystem? Are you using tools like Apollo? So, hey, so-and-so who's the head of marketing, we need your head of sales, we need your chief of revenue to be on the call too. And then I pull that information from Apollo. Now I have them queued up. I create an email chain. Is that kind of what you're doing? Or describe the process a little bit more in terms of how you're getting these people who aren't in this ecosystem into this collaborative mode when, I mean, for me at least, that's sometimes the biggest issue. Things get lost in email chains. We're trying to gather everyone we need to make a buying decision, but it's challenging. How are you able to actually get those people to collaborate?
Yeah. So with DealPad, it's actually a lot more powerful than that. So we use Apollo actually as a tool, and it's great. It really is great for discovering data.
Sure.
The challenge is, right, if I'm selling into Procter and Gamble and I want to find somebody inside Procter and Gamble that I think I'm going to need to get access to, and I go to Apollo and find that person, I've now got to reach out to them, right? Now, if I reached out to you, Julian, and I said, and you'd never heard from me, and I said, Julian, we're talking to Greg, having great conversations. I see that you look after the SAP side of Procter and Gamble. Would love to show you how we integrate into SAP so we can tick that box off now.
Yeah.
Right. Would you come back to me? There's a high degree that you wouldn't, right? Because you don't know who I am. You haven't had this verified by anybody in your team yet, right? And so I've got the data. I'm able to reach out to them, but I still don't get a response. So DealPad actually helps you discover stakeholders that you knew nothing about because your buyers bring them in. So if I said to you, Julian, great, let's go through this process together, what's the next step? And you said, well, one of the steps is we use SAP. We need to look at your documentation and we need to kind of verify that you can integrate well into SAP. And I was like, great. Well, look, why don't you bring the people need to happen into the process? You would then reach out to Greg, right? And you would say, hey, Greg, I need you to do me a favor. Can you jump on a call for 30 minutes, speak to these guys? Let me know if you think that they integrate well into SAP in the way that we need them to. And Greg will say, of course, Julian, no problem, right?
Yeah.
And so you then bring Greg in. So now as a salesperson, I've got access to somebody that I knew nothing about.
Yeah.
I'm discovering a new stakeholder. I don't need to find data anymore because actually my buying team are bringing them in for me.
Yeah.
And that's super powerful because they're going to be engaged because it's you and not me that's invited them into the process.
Yeah.
Right? It's you that's asked them to do something and not me. And as a colleague and a peer and somebody that's pulling in the same direction as them for the same goal, they are obviously, they're not even more likely to do it. They are going to do it.
Yeah. And are you doing when you're getting those buyers to pull in other buyers as well or other stakeholders or team members? How do you incentivize them to do that? Is it all based on the value proposition that you initially set out to propose, or what about DealPad is kind of giving you a different strategy or tactic or information? What in particular am I gaining as a salesperson to get my prospect or my buyer to then collaborate and incorporate people versus just asking them to bring in other team members?
Well, I mean, like I said, I think if you ask, it doesn't always get done, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think one of the scariest things for salespeople is that buyers go dark, and you lose visibility of anything they're doing, even if they're working in the background
Yeah.
and evaluating you. You don't see it, and if you don't see something, it worries you. And so
Yeah.
again, in DealPad, you can see what they're doing. You can see how they're engaging, how they're interacting
Yeah.
through the materials you've shared with them, through the plan that you've created together, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and so where where the power of DealPad comes in is that everything is centralized, not just my process as a salesperson, but the buyer's process evaluating me. It's
Mm.
centralized inside DealPad, right?
Yeah.
And so to answer your question specifically, the why is, if I'm going to buy software, I know that I need to go through a process, right?
Yeah.
If this software needs to integrate into SAP, somebody in my company needs to help me evaluate this. Otherwise, we're never going to better buy software from anyone, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so but there's a buying committee,
Got it.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so in a buying committee, you might have 12 people. You'll usually have your executive sponsor who's going to sign all this off and approve it. And they're the ones that will either get the budget agreed or can
Yeah.
just give the budget. You'll have a champion who's the person you'll speak to the most. You'll have a coach, and coaches and champions are very different.
Yeah.
Usually people are confused by that, and they'll have a coach and a champion that's the same person.
Yeah.
And then you'll have people that are peripheral, like the SAP guy, like legal,
Hmm.
procurement, security, compliance. You're probably going to meet them once, but if you don't meet them, that deal is not getting closed.
Yeah.
And so, but as a buyer, I know that I need these people in my team to support me in
Yeah.
purchasing software. And if I can't get that person, then it means I haven't got enough gravitas.
Yeah.
And so, as if I'm selling to you and you keep saying to me, well, we don't need to have Greg at the table yet, or I can do this myself, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to pull out, because software doesn't get sold at mid-market or enterprise level. If we're spending kind of 30K plus, it doesn't get sold typically by one person or built
Right.
by one person, right? So if I can't get you to give me access to your team that I know you're going to need to be able to get this
Yeah.
approved, then I'm out, right?
Yeah.
And DealPad helps you get to that. Am I going to dive in deep, or am I going to pull out pretty
Yeah.
fast?
Yeah.
That's one of the biggest values that we offer, because going back to my previous point, you're not wasting hundreds of hours in these
Yeah.
deals, because it's a rabbit warren, right?
Right.
You're going to
Yeah.
get sucked into meetings with people that actually can't influence on everything that you need them to be able to sign off on.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's really, really important that you understand your buyer's process. What is it you need to be able to tick off, right? What's actually absolutely critical? And then what are things that you would really like to have? And then what are things that you'd be nice to have?
Yeah.
And compartmentalize them. So, okay, well, these are the things we've got to tackle. And even that
Right.
second column, I'd really like to have this. You've got to tick a bunch of those off.
Yeah.
And okay, great. Who needs to be part of this then? So you've just told me you need to do X. That's not you. So who is it? Right.
Right.
And
Right.
I'm, as a seller, I might get back, well, I'm not sure. So I
Right.
would then push back and say, well, look, we need to establish this. So how can I help you find this person? In my experience, this person looks like this. They sit in this team, right?
Yeah.
They do
Yeah.
this type of role. Who would it be? Okay. And so you help your buyer navigate through their own organization, if it's a massive organization, to help them find the right people, and then they'll bring them in. And so if you're missing something in that chain, this deal's not getting closed. And that is where most sellers fall short.
Yeah.
In my 20 years of sales, when I evaluate why deals don't get closed, it's not because the seller doesn't know their job, the seller doesn't know the product, the seller doesn't know the process or how to sell. It's because the seller can't get access to all the right people
Yeah.
that they need to be able to influence this deal.
Yeah.
And for sure, your competition probably know how to access that person. The one person that you can't, you might have access to everyone apart from one person.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that one person you probably only need to meet once.
Right.
But this is never getting signed off if that person needs to tick a box and you can't reach them.
Yeah. I love how you define it. If I were to summarize it, it's understanding your buyer process is hugely important to knowing what are the steps needing to actually accomplish the deal, and then getting those individuals who own those steps collaborated into DealPad. So then at least where the process is going, those individuals have tasks that they need to accomplish. You can see where things are in the progression of the deal flow. And then now with all that intelligence kind of built into one ecosystem, you can actually predict if that's going to close or not. Do I have the people, do I know the people I need to talk to? Do I know the exact steps I need to go through for that procedure? It's awesome to see how that process kind of aligns really kind of, I think what we've been doing maybe mentally or in other CRMs, maybe Apollo and those units try to do it with sequencing tools like that. But there's a lot of minute information that it is kind of left out in that's actually critical, which is that the right people or even the right process to actually get the deal done, rather than just trying to figure out who to talk to and try to pull people into meetings and almost like MacGyver a deal to completion versus actually knowing the procedure around it, right? Which is good.
The best salespeople. Look at any organization. You look at the very best, most successful salespeople, and the thing they do better than everybody else is get access to the right people, and they involve people. They actively seek out people. They're on their team and on the buyer's team. They don't try and do it on their own. The sales people that aren't very successful try to do too much on their own. They don't want to be a time suck. They don't ask for support. They don't ask for access to things. They don't insist on it. The very best salespeople, the one thing they do differently is they really probe and find the right people they need to be able to get this deal done, because they realize this is multi-threaded and it's not going to be one person that's going to help me close this deal.
Yeah. And like you said earlier, it's not one buyer anymore. And there's not one person that's going to make the final decision. It's a collaborative effort. And thinking about the company a little bit more broadly, whether it's something external or internal, seeing that you've had a lot of traction, you've gained a lot of working with a lot of clients and partners, and you've kind of got this process really down. What in particular do you find is the kind of the external or internal risks that the company or challenges that the company faces today? What's most on your mind? Yeah, what's most on your mind when you think about challenges or risks, things that could be critical if they changed the direction of the company?
For my company?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, there's lots of things, right? You've got kind of macroeconomics. The world could just change overnight. Who knows what's happening with interest rates, and in Europe, you've got the war, and things that could impact a company's decision to invest or not, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that could change. We think about how we can mitigate those risks. I think one of the biggest challenges that we face, and it's real and we face it every day now, is most sales teams believe that they've overinvested in sales software and they've got enough software, right? And so they don't have another budget for anything else. And yet I then question them and say, oh, so you're hitting 100% of your quota, are you? And they'll all say no, because not many are.
Nobody is. Yeah.
And so there's a gap. What's the gap? Why aren't you hitting your quota? And then like a few threads come out in the back of that.
Right.
And so it's one of the challenge for me is that sales organizations really need to understand that there's a gap in their sales stack. I I haven't seen many companies that don't have a gap in their sales stack.
Yeah.
And are they invested in the right type of software? Of course, you have to have a CRM. Of course,
Yeah.
it's great to have a prospecting tool, right?
Yeah.
You want Gong or the equivalent or whatever it is because you can coach better, right? But you're missing quotas. So what's happening here,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You're not forecasting exactly as you want to. So what's the cause effect of that? And that's a challenge for us. I think as well, really, it's making sure we innovate. And we're a young company. We've been around for just over 3 years.
Yeah.
And we need to continue to move fast and innovate and be customer first and think about what product our customers are asking us for, where they see the most value, and continually talk to our customers.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge for us because we're a small team and we're thinking heavily on a few areas at the moment that I think could be very impactful for our customers. And as a result, us as a company.
Mhm.
And it's about how we execute that. We've got to execute well.
Yeah.
And we're in a fairly embryonic category. And so there are a dozen vendors in this market right now.
Yeah.
And in my experience, if I think about any category, typically as it matures and it flattens out, you've got 2 or 3 kind of leaders, and then you might have 2 or 3 kind of challengers. But
Yeah.
it's very rare to find a well-defined category with more than 6 players in it.
Yeah.
And right now, ours has at least a dozen.
Yeah.
And so a challenge for us is to make sure that we want to be one of those 2 or 3 leaders. And we are at the moment. And so that's really, really great. But we need to make sure we stay there.
Yeah. Yeah. I love this next section. I call it my founder FAQ. So I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire questions and we'll see what we get from you. So first question, just a softball. What's particularly hard about your job day to day?
I care too much.
Yeah.
Yeah. I care, and I have to care about everything.
Yeah.
I can't stop caring about the smallest things across the whole business. And that's a challenge.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned earlier, which was around kind of the philosophy around selling and really focusing on what would make a buyer, kind of a buyer customer centric. People use many different words to talk about it. How do you train or coach or identify how to approach that, being that a lot of times sales teams will focus on why their company should work or why their product should work at XYZ company versus why should XYZ company buy our product? How do you kind of train that philosophy?
It takes time. And again, this is where if you're an early stage company and you're a founder, this is why founders have to sell, because founders will very quickly discover this, and then they'll be able to kind of build the foundation of that philosophy and that culture from the get-go. But it takes time. If you've got salespeople that aren't used to selling in that way, you have to re-educate them, and that's a challenge.
Yeah.
You often have to find one person in your organization that champions this, and they will be the most successful salesperson if they do it.
Yeah.
And then other people will look at them and say, how are you doing this? How are you being successful? And then it cascades through, but it has to come from the top. You have to build leadership that really believes in outcome and value selling and drives that principle through. But if you haven't got that in an organization today and you're a fairly well-baked, mature organization, it's a shift, and it's obviously it's doable. Clearly, I've done it 3 times in the companies I've joined, and we've gone from 70 million to 100 million in a number of years, right? Were the sales teams doing anything wrong before I joined them with 70 million revenue? Well, no, not really.
Yeah.
But were they leaving a ton of revenue on the table and missed opportunities? Yeah, absolutely. And that's what this does. It helps you maximize the potential of your sales motion.
Yeah. What's something you're good at now as a founder that you wish you were better at earlier on?
I think judgment.
Yeah.
I've got better judgment than I had before. And I don't just think that comes from experience. I think it comes from maturity and patience and just having a different lens in the way I look at things today than the way that I did 10 years ago.
Yeah. 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 What's one thing that if you were to wave a magic wand that you would want right now? Are you in fundraising? Are you looking to scale your teams? Are you hiring? Like what in particular as a founder is top of mind right now?
I'm trying to think about which one.
Yes. Acquiring customers. Yeah. Which in particular you're like, if I could have this fixed today, I could work on 10 million other problems that we have, or not problems, but other ways to grow. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I think that most of our customers, if not, 98% of our customers are in North America right now. And it's such a big market for us. And I'm looking to build out a team in North America. And so making 2 or 3 key hires in that market for us would make a big difference to my life as well. Cause I'm doing lots of cross-Atlantic kind of time zone ways, and it's difficult. So I think that for me right now, if I could solve a problem, was that there are 2 or 3 critical hires that we have in North America that I'd love to find great people for.
Yeah. I always like to ask this next question because I love how founders ingest knowledge from extract knowledge from anything that they ingest, whether it was early in your career or now. What books or people have impacted you the most?
Well, right now I'm reading a book called $100 Million Offers.
Same, actually. Yeah.
You are?
Yeah, I'm in the process of it right now. I think I went through chapter 1, but I do the audiobook, so I'm actually I'm moving through it. Brilliant book.
It's good, isn't it? Yeah. And again, it almost comes back to what I've just described, right? It's being outcome driven, focus on your offer, and your customers will pay what you ask. Yeah. It's an interesting concept. What else have I read? One of my favorite books of all time. It's not a sales book, but it's called Thank You for Being Late by Richard Friedman. And it's a kind of fusion of evolution, technology, and future. And he just merges those 3 topics together brilliantly. It's a fantastic book. I'd recommend that. And there's a book called Qualified Sales Leader, which is a good book. If you're a sales leader, it teaches you a lot of things you already know, but it's a good refresher.
Yeah.
So I think for books, they're the books that I would recommend. In terms of people that have influenced me, there's a lady called Trish Atutsi. I don't know if you've come across Trish,
I've heard.
but she's quite active on LinkedIn. But she's the author of the Sales Development Playbook.
That's how I know her. She's
been around for years, and is one of the most knowledgeable people on software sales because she's just been in the trenches for so long. She shared some really insightful stuff on LinkedIn, and I started following someone years ago called Jill Conrad. I consume less of her kind of updates now, but she's great. She's been in software sales for years. And an obvious one that most people know is Simon Sinek.
Yeah.
I think that his way of thinking, his methodologies were, but still are very cutting edge. The way that he thinks about things. So I like to be influenced by him.
Yeah, I love that. I like what you said about in your response to Simon. And if you do it right too, and if you really can answer that why question, it really does change the association with your customers, your brand, your strategy. It really kind of comes really cohesive. At least I've seen on my team.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Apple really came out with that, didn't he? But he picked up on what Apple had done really well. Right. And I don't know how long ago that was, but I want to say 10 years ago now, or maybe longer. But it was almost like a revelation when he came out with this focus on the why.
Right.
And everyone was like, whoa, okay, because we focused on the what.
Right.
What is this? You know, and the how does it work? Right.
Right.
But the why is the most important thing. Start with the why, because why does somebody want this? Right. Doesn't matter what you do or how you do it. What matters is why they're going to want it. Why are they buying from you? What's the outcome they're looking for? And then align that back to what you do and how you do it. It's exactly. Simon Sinek's ahead of his time in the way he thinks.
Yeah. I know we're a little bit over time, but it's been such a pleasure chatting with you, Adam. And last little bit is I like to make sure we didn't leave anything on the table. Is there any question that I didn't ask you that I should have, Or is there anything that we didn't chat about that you wanted to bring up one more little time? Yeah, anything we left on the table here today?
No, not at all. I think we had a good conversation. It's been great. I think if anybody wants to follow me, my LinkedIn is Adam L. Baker, and dealpad.io is our website if anyone wants to check out what we're doing.
Amazing. Adam, you beat me to it. Thank you for your plugs. And I definitely will share that with our audience. It's been such a pleasure not only learning your journey, how you think about sales, how you think about the process, how companies can actually make changes today in knowing more about their buyers to actually have better outcomes. They can use DealPad to align not only the sales team, but their buyers and everyone's incentives. So it's exciting to see what you've built now and where you're going. But Adam, it's been such a pleasure. I hope you enjoyed yourself. And thank you again for being on Behind Company Lines today.
Thanks, Julian. Appreciate it.
Of course.